In this video, we'll have a complete step-by-step look at how to replace brake rotors and pads in almost all vehicles. For this job, you'll need a socket set, a breaker bar, and a torque wrench, a brake compression tool, which you'll use to compress the caliper piston, large hammer, flathead screwdriver or pry bar, and some wire brushes. You'll also need some brake clean, some anti-seize, both the silver and copper, some silicone brake lube, and the blue medium strength thread locker. To raise the vehicle, you'll need a jack, some jack stands, and some tire chocks or some wood in place of the chocks. And of course, rotors, pads, and brake hardware. Start by cracking the lugs loose, then jack the area you're working on. In this case, the front end, the front brakes. If you're working on front brakes, engage the parking brake and chock the rear tires. Check your manual for recommended jack and jack stand placement. With the car jacked up, place jack stands, being careful not to crawl under the car, which is unsafe at this point, but rather just reaching with your arm. Now remove the lug nuts and the wheel and slide it under the frame for extra safety. If the wheel is rust welded, leave a few loose lug nuts in place and kick around the outside of the tire with your heel. There. Now with the tire off, turn your steering wheel to give you easy access to the caliper bolts. So now with the wheel turned, we can easily access the caliper bolts. There's one here and one here. Just going to loosen off the bottom one. Now depending on your vehicle, they may be quite tight and you'll need to use a breaker bar. In this case it's 10 mil bolt, small bolt, so not on very tight. And with that off, we should be able to open this up. Use a flathead screwdriver to pry if needed. That up, remove our brake pads. Just slide out. Now to remove the last caliper bolt, and I'm just going to break this top bolt just to loosen it. Now I can remove that second caliper bolt. And at this point, this is your rubber brake line. You want to make sure that there's no pressure on it, but we need to get this out of the way. So you might be able to find an area to tuck it in, or take a bungee cord and hang it. The main concern here is that this rubber brake line has no twists or tension on it. Now it's time to remove the caliper bracket. When we come around back, we can see it's held on by two bolts, here and here. Now in my case, those are 18 mil. I'm going to remove those with the breaker bar. Break the second one before I take that out. Now time to take the brake rotor off. Before you do, check to see if there are any screws holding it in place. Some won't, some will. This one does. It has a Torx, and in this case we have a T30. Now in case this happens to you, I'm taking out this screw that holds the rotor in, but as I attempt to do so, my whole front end is turning here. So slide some wood underneath that other tire, jam some plywood under that other tire just to hold it in place. That's a little better. Now to remove the brake rotor. It's on there pretty good. Sometimes they get rust welded to the back. So the thing to do is we're going to hit the outside. You want a large hammer But if you can, you want to spin it as you go and just hit it around the different surfaces. I'll have to improvise, leave it in place. And there we go. So there you can see the rust that was holding it on. And now we need to clean that up. So we'll get a wire brush, you can use sandpaper, and we're just going to clean that, get as much as we can off of there. The goal is to get this surface as smooth as possible. You can see that this one's particularly bad, so I'm going to just keep working on it. Hopefully yours are better. Worth mentioning that while I'm doing this, I'm wearing a mask and glasses. Once it's cleaned up, get a bucket, hit it with a shot of brake clean. And while we're at it, also cleaning the caliper bracket. So to do that, I'm first going to remove the brake hardware. I'm mainly cleaning in the areas where the hardware sits. So I'm going to clean these surfaces on both sides. Be careful not to jam this into the ground as I do this. Now with everything disassembled and cleaned up, it's time to install our new brake parts. So starting with the rotor, and we need to clean both surfaces, here and here where the pads make contact. So you can hit those with some brake clean. If you don't have brake clean, you can use a little bit of 99% alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and that'll do just as good a job. It's important that these are good and clean because otherwise your brake pads won't grab. An additional step that I like to take, which is purely optional, is to put just a little bit of the gray anti-seize just where the rotor is going to contact the hub. It always rust welds there, so I just like to put a little bit on. Before going any further with this install, now either change your gloves or wash your hands because you don't want to get any dirt on the rotor surface. Now ready to mount the rotor. In my case, remember, there was a screw there, so if you have a screw, make sure that you line it up. Screw that in. If you don't have a screw to hold it in place, use a couple of lug nuts. Next we put our caliper bracket back on using our caliper bolts, and we're going to use our blue Loctite on these. These are torqued quite tight, in the neighborhood of 90 foot-pounds. Check your manual. Next it's time to address the piston in the caliper. We need to push this back in, but before we do, two things. One is to clean this rim so that you can see sometimes get a lot of crud in there. We want to take that off before we compress it back in so that it saves the life of this boot. And to do that, get some of your brake clean. Don't spray it directly on, it'll damage some of the rubber, but just get it on a rag and then wipe it. And also locate your brake fill reservoir, and you want to just crack the cap so that there's no back pressure or vacuum. Now we need to push this piston back in as far back as it'll go, and you can do that with channel locks. However, what is better and recommended is to take the old brake pad and take your compressor tool, and then slowly you want to compress this very, very slowly. You can see it moving back. Just very slow. Gives a chance for all the fluid that's in here to back up into the system, and we want that to occur gently. No, I can't turn this anymore. That's backed as far as it'll go. So, ready to move to the next step. which is to install our brake hardware. Now we've already taken the old hardware off. I like to compare just to make sure that the new brake hardware is the same as the old. And there's really only one way that this will fit. So you can see this shape is reflected in this. And this will just clip on. And then the top one. So now our brake pads will ride in here, and they need to be able to go in and out, so we need to lubricate that system, and for that we'll use the copper anti-seize. Just take a little bit on your finger. You just want really the minimum that you can apply, because remember there's a lot of dirt and dust that can get in this area, and if dirt and dust collects and sticks to this paste, it will actually have the opposite effect of what we're going for. So we don't want to gum it up. Just enough to keep everything moving, top and bottom. Then apply copper anti-seize to the backs and guide tips of the new brake pads. And take off your gloves or wash your hands, because now we don't want to get any of that on the rotor itself. Feed the pads onto the brake hardware. The pad with the wear guard will go to the back. So now it's time to put our caliper back on, but before we do that, we have to address these guide pins. On some vehicles there will be a fixed guide pin, in which case you would just clean it up with some brake clean and put some silicone based lubricant on it. These guide pins are removable and they pop out just like that. So we're going to clean those up. Apply some silicone lubricant and put them back in. And just a little note, you notice that I didn't put any on the end here. If you do, that can create a kind of back pressure that will actually push the pin outward. So I don't have any on the end there. We just feed that back in, right, until that boot sits in place. Now the second pin, same thing. And you want to make sure that they are moving freely. The top guide pin felt a little stiff, so I gave it another greasing. Now to put the caliper back on. So in preparation, I'm going to put the top bolt in first and just put a little bit of blue Loctite on there, all the way around. Lower this down, being careful not to kink. We're just being aware of that rubber brake line. Put my bolt on, just finger tight, and then I can slide it into position over the brake pads. Now it's not quite in position because I've got to bring this bottom piece in. And there we go. Now we're ready. And adding some Loctite to the second bolt, blue Loctite, medium strength. And get that second bolt in place. And we can tighten them both down to 25 foot-pounds. Now to straighten it out and put the wheel back on. But before I do, I'm going to hit these lugs with a little bit of the silver anti-seize. It's an optional step, but these lugs are in need of it. I also sometimes will hit this rotor surface here where the rim makes contact, but in this case I don't really have to worry about rust because I've got this powder coat. Once your wheel's on, just a cursory tightening of all the lugs. Now this is basically hand tight. Now we just repeat the same procedure on the other side. With both sides complete, time to tighten the lug nuts. Lower the jack so the tire is making contact, and then tighten the lug nuts in a star pattern to approximately 90 foot-pounds. Then lower and remove the jack. Tighten down your brake line fill cap. Get inside your vehicle and pump the brakes until they feel stiff. There we go. Feel when they start. That's it. Take it for a drive to test, and you are done. If this video was helpful, please like and subscribe. If it saved you a bit of money, why not send me a little thanks through YouTube at the bottom? I'd appreciate it. That will allow me to make more videos, save you more money. Thanks for watching.